30 years ago, polio survivors in Nebraska came together to face a new challenge. They had recovered from polio to become productive citizens, but gradually found themselves experiencing fatigue, breathing difficulties, and pain. They didn't know what was wrong. The little-known condition has a name: post-polio syndrome. Nancy Baldwin Carter saw a need to bring survivors together to talk about their new challenge and find avenues of help. She founded the Nebraska Polio Survivors Association.
I started it because I had been miserable with pain and weakness and all of this stuff that was bothering me. Nobody knew what it was. I went to doctors, and the rheumatologist said, "You got arthritis." Went to another guy, and he said, "You know, the trouble with you is your posture's not good. Let's straighten up your posture, everything will be fine." Went to another guy, and I said, "I cannot swallow." This is a throat guy. I said, "I cannot swallow." He looked at my throat and said, "Oh, of course you can swallow, dear. You go home tonight and have a big steak and a nice baked potato." Thank you. And I went 7 doctors, and I got this from. One of them wrote something on a prescription pad and handed it to me. It was the name of a shrink. Okay, I didn't do that one. But this was what was going on. Nobody understood it. They couldn't help it. They'd never seen it before.
Nancy began calling, looking for others with post-polio syndrome, and she found sympathetic ears, including a woman who lost sisters to polio.
She said, "Start a polio association." I said, "Sure, why not?" Sounded good to me. I didn't know what I was talking about. And so I did. Got on the phone, started calling everybody I knew who had polio, started telling them, tell everybody else that you know, give them my phone number, ask them to call me. And after a few months, we had a meeting. We had 66 people at our first actual polio meeting.
In 1984, the Nebraska Polio Survivors Association took shape. The goal was to provide information for those who didn't know what was happening to them, and a hand to those who needed it.
Sure, we had support group meetings, but we had a lot of other stuff too. We accommodated people in ways that there was no other way for them to be helped. And in order to do all these things that we were doing, we had to have money. We did not have any money. Nobody got paid. I was doing this for, I think, 7 or 8 years.
To build awareness, Nancy called the Omaha World-Herald and got a big surprise. Medical and science reporter Mary McGrath told Nancy that doctors she had spoken to knew nothing about post-polio syndrome. Eventually, Nancy convinced McGrath that there was indeed such a syndrome, and the World-Herald published her story, which stirred interest across Nebraska. The Nebraska Polio Survivors Association became the nation's first statewide post-polio group.
We set up meetings for polio survivors all across the state. We ended up with 10 places in the state, covering a lot of people, a lot of hundreds of people that had polio. There's a lot of polio people around. People don't quite understand that we're still here. We got rid of polio, but we didn't get rid of us. We're still here.
Nancy, now 77, first showed signs of polio at age 11 in 1948.
Next morning I woke up. I had the flu, we thought. A little temperature, a little pain, a little weakness, that kind of stuff. And in those days, the doctor came out to the house, and the doctor said, she's got the flu. But it got worse and worse. Before too long, I could not breathe. I was having trouble breathing. And so he said, "This is polio."
Nancy went on to earn a master's degree, married, and became a teacher. It was years before she experienced signs of post-polio syndrome.
I guess I didn't notice it till I was about 30, maybe a couple of years more than that. and I began having a lot of pain, a lot of back trouble. This was, at the time, it was not post-polio syndrome.
Every member of NPSA has a story like Nancy's, a childhood of pain, challenges, and success. Marie Galda's story goes all the way back to 1925, when she was infected with the virus at the age of 2. And back then, doctors didn't even have a name for the disease.
And at that time, it was quite undiagnosed. My parents took me to many different doctors in various Midwestern states. Eventually, the name infantile paralysis was given to this mysterious disease. It was quite unknown, but eventually it was noticeable that there was one person like me, and practically every grade school in Omaha had a person like me. It wasn't uncommon, but it just wasn't, there was just no treatment whatsoever. At some point, the left leg brace and the back brace were separated, so then from then on I could sit. And then eventually the entire back brace was thrown away, it was not needed. I only had the long leg braces, and I walked with crutches all through grade school. The grade school teachers also worried about me. What could she ever do to support herself? She'll never marry, you know. What can she do to support herself? And at that time, the only prominent woman in the news was Marie Curie. So they said, her name is Marie, she should be a chemist. And so they pushed me into that field. I can't say it was my choice at all.
Marie won her battle with polio, went on to college, and had a successful career as a chemist. But then, post-polio struck.
My symptoms are extreme fatigue, complete lack of stamina. I used to swim about maybe 30, 40 times a year, and not a great deal of swimming, but regular. For about 30 years I was a swimmer, and it was extremely good for me, built me up. But as I got this post-polio, I got weaker and weaker and had to give it up.
Millie Malone Lill was 4 years old, the 9th of 10 siblings, when she was infected with polio in 1945. She became sick after a fun day at the carnival with her sisters.
The next morning when I woke up, I was getting ready to go to Sunday school, and from the knee down on my left leg, I had nothing. I couldn't stand up. And they called the doctor in, and he had me taken to Iowa City. I was in isolation for, I think, 2 weeks. I remember being told that everything I owned had to be burned. After the second surgery, I was going to high school by then, and I was going up and down the 3-story building from the basement to the 3rd story on crutches, scaring the heck out of people because I'd take 3 steps at a time. I've always been in a hurry.
Millie married young and became a farmer's wife. After her first husband's death, she remarried and moved to Canada before returning to her native Iowa, later becoming a book author. She has 3 sons, 9 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. And although she's led a full life, post-polio has slowed her active lifestyle.
When I was in my 40s, I noticed I was falling a lot and getting fatigued very, very easily. And then I went back into a brace. And shortly after I got the brace, which was one of the heavy metal and steel ones, I stepped on something and fell, twisted my whole body over the bad leg, and got a spiral fraction right just below my knee. It took 1.5 years before I could walk again. And at that point, I had lost so much strength I couldn't lift that brace anymore. It seems like the post-polio comes on after some form of trauma. And that happened about the same time that my husband died, just shortly before he died. So I had kind of a double whammy, physical and emotional. And that seems to be what brought it on.
The Nebraska Polio Survivors Association caught her attention.
I had gotten started with NPSA when my husband was down here at one of the hospitals. I saw a brochure, and contacted Nancy, started writing articles for the newsletter, and somewhere in the late 80s, I was the newsletter editor for a while until my husband died.
We started out the second year with a newsletter, went out every month, and we had at least 15 or 16 articles, little ones if they had to be, but with addresses and phone numbers where you can get this help, where you can get that help. This stuff was important. We had a brochure that we sent out. I think they've gotten one recently. That's important. That's how you get to the public.
Nancy was a big inspiration. She's just fantastic.
We worked our tails off. Everybody.
81-year-old Gene Roth was a high school senior living on a farm near Wisner, Nebraska, when polio struck him in 1949. He was 16, and when he learned he had polio, Gene was at first relieved.
I knew I had a brain tumor. My head hurt so bad. I thought my head was going to just explode. And I says, there's something wrong. And when they diagnosed me as having polio, a high spinal count of like 600 and some, and I was relieved that I only had polio. I didn't have to have brain surgery, so I guess I didn't realize how serious polio could be. I was hospitalized only 2 weeks here in Omaha at the county hospital at that time. And my doctor, I don't remember his name, I have it written down somewhere, but he said I was a very, very lucky boy. I had no paralysis when I left the hospital. I went home that night and I was going to go to a high school dance the day I just discharged from the hospital. And they said, no, you're not. The doctor had talked to him. I had to stay home another month, and I actually had trouble walking out of the hospital after being in bed 2 weeks. You know, had to kind of learn how to walk all over. But here I thought I was going to go to a dance the day I got discharged.
He later married and had 5 children and a career as a banker before retiring. He even served in the U.S. Army after his polio diagnosis.
I was surprised I even got in, but I volunteered and passed the physical, so away I went.
Gene first noticed signs of post-polio syndrome 30 years ago, and that led him to become an active member of NPSA, serving for a long time as its president.
I was out in the garden digging a post hole by hand, and it was very dry, and I wanted to get it dug. So I just kept really exerting myself, and within a week or two my arms just were really sore all the way up, and I couldn't figure it out. They never got better. It just took forever. And somebody said, well, you probably have post-polio syndrome, that I was talking to. And that's when I joined the NPSA, started coming to meetings, and probably close to 25 years ago. I really enjoyed meeting the new people, being a president of the organization, and it was a fun experience, but time to give it up at my age.
Chip McKenzie was 6 years old in 1952 when his parents first heard the diagnosis, which by then had a name: poliomyelitis.
The only part I remember of it is I was allowed to go to my parents' bedroom and stay in their bed. But when I got out of bed, I fell down. And my memory is I crawled to my parents' bedroom. That night, they brought the doctor into the house. They shipped me off to the county hospital, did a spinal tap, and confirmed that I did in fact have polio. It took 2 people to give me the medicine, one to hold my jaw open and the other to pour the medicine. I have no idea what it was, but it was terrible tasting. What I didn't like about the polio was that it tended to separate me from the other kids. I couldn't go out and play games with them. And in fact, I remember spending a lot of time inside during recess. And I don't think that was good for my development. But what it was. When you get polio, you lose a lot of muscle strength, but a lot of it comes back if you push hard enough. The post-polio thing you're hearing about are circumstances where after many years, 25 or more, people end up losing some of that regained strength. For me, it was my middle 30s when I started to lose strength. And so it's been a long trip through my middle years. The biggest thing that catches people by surprise is they might, for example, have polio and some weakness, and then they recover. But maybe it's only 90% or 80, say it's like 110% of normal. And as they age, they might lose 5% of that strength per year. And pretty soon, you don't have enough strength to function normally. So a lot of people who thought they had polio but recovered, in fact, end up in a post-polio group because they're starting to struggle and they don't understand why. I used to fall a lot and get up, fall and get up. And the way I look at it is, when I fall, I bounce because I always get up.
Chip contracted polio during an epidemic tidal wave in Nebraska. Polio seemed to be everywhere in 1952. Parents were frightened, says Dr. Byron Oberst, who was then a pediatrician at Children's Hospital.
In 1952, the summer came in very serenely, and then all hell broke loose. The public reaction to polio in 1952, people lived in constant fear, as you remember, from late June to the middle of August, September or August, when the first killing frost came into play. We had over 360 children in Children's Hospital during that year. We used alcoves for bed spaces. It was a nightmare.
But 1952 was one of the last years that polio terrorized the community. Starting in 1954, the breakthrough Salk and Sabin vaccines would begin to eradicate polio from the United States and much of the world.
This country has not had a case of wild polio since 1979.
Unfortunately, vaccinations are not universal, and the threat continues.
Well, there's always a threat when people aren't getting inoculated. If you don't take your kids to take care of that portion of their health, the possibility exists.
Children in this country are as much at risk for polio as children in countries such as Afghanistan and Pakistan if they have not been vaccinated. And as safe and effective as the vaccine has been for 60 years, children in some parts of the world are being denied a chance for immunity from the disease.
Over in Africa and in some of the parts of the Middle East, they shoot people that are over there trying to vaccinate people for polio.
Polio is still endemic in countries such as Syria and Nigeria, where workers are unable to reach the children. And here in the United States, it is just a plane ride away. There is no cure, but there is prevention through inoculation. And there is still help for those who live their lives with the long-term effects of the disease. The Nebraska Polio Survivors Group of dedicated volunteers now celebrates 30 years of service to those living with post-polio syndrome. 30 years of finding hope and help, of educating the medical community about post-polio syndrome while learning about it ourselves, of collaborating with other groups to reach our goals, of raising funds to continue the work. 30 years of speaking, educating, and attending health fairs. 30 years of relentless publicity, keeping the topic of post-polio before the public. 30 years of advocating for members, of fellowship, of tending to and embracing members from Chadron to Omaha and beyond Nebraska's borders. And 30 years of extraordinary volunteerism, even as members themselves find polio limiting their activities again decades after they were first infected.
I found out about the polio group from an article in the Orange County newspaper in California that my mother sent me. So I went to the meeting, I volunteered to do their mailing list. I learned that people with any degree of ability will be sucked in very quickly. And so I ended up serving a number of positions for the group over a period of years.
Everybody wanted this. They wanted it so badly. They wanted the doctors to know something. They wanted them to know something. And we had to see to it that everybody else understood that we were here.
Be of service to others, I guess that's what it's all about, yeah.
I have great appreciation for the Polio Association because they were able to channel me to the medicine I take.
Polio survivors are inspiring people because we never say quit. We keep going all the time. Even when it's hard, we still keep going. I'm very proud of my polio survivor friends.
Thank you, each and every one of you.